All right, so it's really simple, 3 phases. How we produce energy is obviously the first major factor. How you create force, second major factor. And how we transmit force is the third major factor. And then as an add-on to that is the technical components as well. So if you can do all those three things well, and you're a very good technically gifted athlete, then you're in a pretty good position. So how does this relate to what we're interested in? What we've got in boxing is we've got fast muscle actions, okay, for those high force punches, fast muscle actions occurring. We've got something called momentum. I'm not going to dig too much into the physics, but the momentum is something that's really important in boxing. It explains a lot about punching performance. And then we have the second pulse, or an effective mass. So Dan touched on that earlier, and is actually quite an important part of making contact and punching, and how effective a punch is. So another bit of a graph here. So what we've got here is, down here we've got time. Okay, so this is the time from the onset of muscle action. So what the researchers have done here, Scandinavian researchers, they've got participants in a dynamometer which measures strength, and they've got them to kick out. Okay, and what they've done is they've looked at how quickly they develop force and over what time period. So this is time here. Then what they've done is they've looked at how strong they are. Okay, so they've done a maximum test. So they've gone boom and tried to work out what the maximum force is that the quadriceps can produce. And then they've looked at how that maximum strength relates to how quickly you can produce force. So this axis here is something called a correlation coefficient, that then we can look at how closely something is explained by another thing. And the higher this figure, the more we can become confident that one thing explains another. So in this respect, it relates to how well does strength, maximum strength, relate to how quickly you can develop force. Okay? So whilst I'm explaining this, just have in your mind the fact that, you know, some people still think being strong, lifting weights makes you slow. Okay, just have that in mind. Okay, so here we go. So a punch is delivered in 200 milliseconds or less, rapid. Danny's got a smirk on his face because hopefully what we've got coming up is an absolute beauty of a slide. So here's our punch speed. So it's around 200 milliseconds here. And what we've got here is the relationship between strength and the rate of force development. So as time increases, what we've got here is an increase in this relationship, so that when a punch is delivered over this time frame, strength explains 90% of how much force you can produce. So the stronger you are, the faster you can produce force over that time period. It's as simple as that. Okay? Oh, there you go. I thought I'd done that. The stronger you are, the more likely you can produce force quickly. So if you're strong and you've got strong through weight training, it's not going to make you slow. It's going to make you fast. It's going to help you produce force in a very short amount of time and a lot of force. If you add in a second pulse to that as well, which is what I'll come on to in a second, then you've also got a very large explanation here too. So more strength, quicker force generation.
Does it matter the time under tension when you are doing reps and stuff? Because obviously going heavy, you want it to be as controlled as possible, and the eccentric part, you don't want to rush it either. Yeah. Do you want to get it up as quick as possible when you're doing reps?
Yeah, it depends on. Yeah, it depends on what the training focus is. Most types of training have a role, you know, and it just depends on where and when you need to put that type of training in.
Slow controlled reps as well as having some quicker?
Yeah, I mean, it depends on the athlete, depends on the training phase that they're in as well, and what type of training history that they've got. Yeah. But if you are doing slower reps, then generally you're not training the amount of force that you can produce quickly. Okay. So it would be better to move that or have the intention to move that quickly, because that will change the way your neuromuscular system activates the muscles. Okay. Go on then, mate. So you can see there how it's really important that you develop force in a really short space of time. It can be highly effective. And Jordan's one of the strongest relatively on the program as well. So hence why force generation, the ability to produce a lot of force and strength, is really important in boxing. Another thing that contributes is something called the impulse momentum relationship. Now this is the relationship that NASA used to send space rockets to Mars or wherever into space, and we use it as well to help Jordan knock people out. So if you can increase momentum, then you can deliver a harder punch. Problem is, if you're not a heavyweight, and to an extent you've also got that problem, it's very difficult to influence momentum through one factor that is an important contributor to it, and I'll go on that in a second. So if we break it down, we have impulse, which is simply the relationship or the amount of force you can produce over a certain period of time. That's it. Okay. Momentum is mass times velocity. So what it means is we've got force over time, and we saw in the previous slide how producing force very quickly is important. So if you can produce a lot of force quickly, then you're very impulsive. If you can move your mass very quickly, then you have a lot of momentum. Simple. NASA says so. Yeah, there we go. So you can either be a rocket, and we all know the boxers that look like rockets but aren't that effective, or you can be an elephant, and we all know the elephants that are slow as well, don't we? So a rocket produces a lot of force very quickly, very impulsive, whereas an elephant has a lot of momentum because they've primarily got a large mass. Or you can be like this guy. So we can strap this rocket, this force, to the elephant, okay? And we can move this. Imagine if this were coming at you. This is going to knock you out.
Was that already on the internet?
That was, yeah. That's from an EE advert. Wow. I was like, I'm having that. This is what we need. It's from a few years ago, but this explains it completely. If you've got a lot of mass, and you're let's say you're a heavyweight boxer, and you've got a big rocket, you can produce a lot of force, then you can produce a lot of speed too, and that's going to hurt some people. I go the wrong way. So we've got AJ down here, and then who's that, Pacquiao?
I want that as a canvas in my gym.
So that's the reason why AJ can hit so hard, is because he's so fast. For a heavyweight,
He's awesome.
But Frank Bruno was built the same way as
Josh.
Yeah, and but he didn't move as fast as Josh. So What's went on there then? Like, 'cause
Science.
Yeah, I mean, if you look at the type of training that AJ does, a lot of it is around speed, but he's putting on mass as well. He's getting bigger, isn't he? And he's carrying that speed through. So yeah.
Trains at that Velocity Fitness, doesn't he? Over in Birmingham, I think he does a lot of his training in that. And
Yeah.
massive on that.
So yeah, he's working on the velocity part of that impulse momentum relationship. Okay. So the big problem for us is improving momentum, and the easiest way to do that is to put on mass. But when you weight restricted, pretty difficult unless you're transferring mass to different areas of the body, which is also pretty difficult. Okay, so we're just going over the slide that we've just done here. So either you're AJ or you're lightweight, but we can change momentum not by changing mass, but getting more impulsive. So creating and producing more force. So this is where we come in, helping our guys produce more force and producing quickly. That's going to change, let's go back. It's going to change velocity. So if this stays the same and we change this, velocity will increase, speed will increase. And we know how devastating speed is when you've got the force. NASA says so. Okay. The third component of producing force is having this effective mass. So what we've got here is an illustration of how force is delivered on impact. Okay, so as well as being as an impulsive boxer when you're generating force, you can also be an impulsive boxer when you're delivering the punch as well, and that occurs through creating effective mass and something called the second pulse. So some researchers in America have looked at when there are peaks in muscle activity during different striking actions and punches and kicks. And what they found is that there's an increase in force, an increase in muscle activity on the initiation of a punch, but then there's as Dan said, there's a relaxation before you then stiffen up on impact. So this first part of the curve here is that initial muscle activity, but then there's another peak here as well. Don't think you can see it up there, but yeah, so this is on the impact there is another peak in muscle activity. Now you might just think that, oh, you know, you throw a punch in and that's it, but actually, you know, combat athletes, they have a second pulse in activity as well, which often people either don't know about or they don't train neither. Yeah. And so what you've got is what they found is that you've got these on-off pulses of different muscles. So the first pulse is the initiation of movement, and then as speed increases, the muscles relax, and then they undergo this second pulse, and that creates a stiffness as well. So that's another way in which you can create force, which is not generally well appreciated. And then Dan went through a lot of this in the mobility section, but you can produce energy and produce a lot of it, or you can produce force and produce a lot of it, but if you're limited in the way that you can transmit that force, it's not going to get from the foot all the way to the fist. And so the way that we describe this is through this thing called a kinetic chain. So what we want is this nice, clean force transmission that's not limited throughout the range. And that's really dependent upon a few mechanisms that determine how much tension you can produce at different muscle lengths, and how quickly you can produce force at different muscle lengths as well. So the first one is this length-force relationship. So something that we did for the science behind Golovkin was trying to explain why he's so devastating in his punches. And he generally is most effective in that mid-range where his muscles are actually in the optimal position for producing tension. So he's very effective at producing forces, but that second pulse, if we were to stick EMG sensors on him, they would be huge. because he's able to stiffen up and produce isometric force and tension on that impact. So he can produce a lot of force at this top end of the curve because of this muscle length. So he mainly throws mid-range punches, meaning that he's going to have that larger impulse on his target. So he can produce a lot of force, but also he's delivering a lot of force on the target as well.
I'll just step in. Like what we were doing with Jordan earlier, that kind of rotation. If we improve that rotation so he can punch there, if he's still landing here, it's like length relationship is going to be much better. If he's at end, if it's like rotational capacity there, it's not going to produce as much force. It's like kind of punching that end range, flicking the end of the nose, right? And it's hard to produce force all the way up there. But if you're capable of moving all the way to there, when you're actually landing there, or landing Marquez against Pacquiao when you're there, yeah, you're going to be able to produce a little bit more force. Just put in context of what I talked about earlier with movement training.
Yeah, so you can see the relationship between muscle length and force. So as this range increases, you get an optimum amount of force, but then the amount of force you can produce as the muscle either lengthens or shortens also gets less as well. It gets less. So you produce less force, but you can actually train that as well. So you can train to produce more force at either greater or shorter muscle lengths. Another very important relationship is the amount of force that you can produce dependent to the amount of speed that you can produce as well. And so this part of the curve represents eccentric muscle actions, which we probably won't focus on now, but in a concentric action, what you have is the quicker you can produce, is the faster you are, the less force you can produce, which is counterintuitive to what I've just said. But it explains why you see guys that are really, really quick, but very ineffective. So you need that balance between how much force you can produce and how effective that force is at the speed that you're producing it.